Hello, I'm Nivien Saleh, and with me here is Amir Emadi, a student at Thunderbird. Today we're going to talk about the MEK, or the People's Mujahedin of Iran. The MEK has been called one of the most secretive cults in the world. It was founded in 1965, and its leader is Masoud Rajavi. In 1979, the MEK participated in a broad-based movement to overthrow the Shah of Iran. The revolution was then hijacked by Ayatollah Khomeini, who subsequently outlawed the MEK because he decided that the organization was not a true Muslim organization. Reportedly, the MEK then killed Iranian officials as well as civilians. At the same time, thousands of its members suffered execution and torture at the hands of the Iranian regime. In 1981, Rajavi escaped to France. Soon after, says Al Jazeera, the MEK evolved into a cult. It was about at the same time that Rajavi met Maryam, who became his second wife. And the Rajavi said that a woman should have equal leadership in the organization. And so Maryam Rajavi became an important leading figure in the MEK. In the late 1990s, the US government put the organization on the list of the foreign terrorist organizations. In 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq, where most of the MEK members were residing, in fact, they were residing in the Camp Ashraf, the MEK disarmed. And recently, in September 2012, the US government removed the MEK from its list of terrorist organizations. The removal followed a high-profile campaign in which several important political figures in the United States participated. Among them, two former CIA directors, as well as former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani. All of them said the MEK is peaceful now. It should no longer be on that list. All right, the first question that I have is, what is your personal relationship to the organization?
Sure. My personal relationship to the MEK, it's actually a blood thing. My parents, both of my parents are MEK members in Camp Ashraf. They live there with 19 other relatives. And in fact, I have relatives inside Iran who are supporters and some members of the MEK. Some of them have been imprisoned because they are opposed to the regime in Iran. And some of them have been tortured, and some of them have actually been shot in Camp Ashraf, particularly when the Iraqi military attacked the camp. Well, I did a lot of work on this particular issue, on Camp Ashraf and the MEK. I wanted to learn more about the organization that I'm so attached to as far as blood and relatives. And through my process, I realized that there's not that much information out there about the MEK and Camp Ashraf, at least not any positive information. In fact, most of the information that's available to the general public is very negative, and some of them were allegations that had never been proved. So I set on a mission to learn how to create websites and created campashraf.org. And the purpose of this website is to show the positive side of Camp Ashraf and how the MEK live in this self-sustaining city.
How many members does the MEK have?
I would not be able to answer that exactly. I can assume that the MEK has thousands of members, particularly because many of them live in Camp Ashraf and Camp Liberty. Because many of the members of the MEK live in Camp Ashraf and Camp Liberty, there's about 3,400 of them there. I can assume that there's a few thousand.
So reports that I have read say it has between 3,000 and 5,000 members. Would that be correct?
That would be my assumption.
Why don't you explain to us what the MEK is? What does it stand for? When was it? What are its goals?
Sure, I can give a brief history of the MEK, a little extension to what you provided. Essentially, the MEK, which is called Mujahedin Khalq, the true meaning behind the name is the defenders of human beings, essentially the people's defenders. And it was started in 1965. It was a university student named Muhammad Hanif-Nejad who started this organization based on nationalist principles. It interpreted Islam in a very modern and democratic view. And what it sought to do was to facilitate freedom in the political system of Shah's reign and Shah's regime. Currently, the MEK seeks to replace the Islamic Republic of Iran, the current dictatorship in Iran, with a democratic, secular, non-nuclear republic in the country.
What is the MEK ideology? I have read that the thinking that it embraced was called, quote, Islamic Marxist. Now that is quite an unusual combination. Yes. Give us a little bit more on that.
Well, when you think a little bit more about Islamic Marxist, it actually doesn't make that much sense. But in fact, the name Islamic Marxist was derived from the Shah's propaganda. It was the Savak that called many organizations, not just the MEK, Islamic Marxists, to give them a negative view.
And let me just say, Savak is the secret service of the Shah.
Yes, my apologies. I'll try to clarify next time. Yes, the Savak had deemed the MEK and many other organizations in Iran as Islamic Marxist to potentially give the people of Iran a bad view of the organization and opposition movements. It is not Islamic Marxist. It supports a modern. It was essentially initially based on a modern and democratic version of Islam, but currently seeks a very secular and democratic country for Iran.
And do you know what the reasons were for making that switch?
A lot of historical context goes behind this. The original founder, Muhammad Hanif-Nejad, and many of the other leaders during the Shah's time were all imprisoned. The Shah had imprisoned them all, and most of them were executed. Then through the reigns came Masoud Rajavi, who chose to take this organization, put it on his back, and carry it down through the Iranian politics.
Camp Ashraf is, I think, 60 miles north of Baghdad. Would that be correct?
Yes, about 50 miles, yes.
How did Camp Ashraf come into being?
Well, Camp Ashraf, and this kind of carries us along the history of the revolution. When the Iranian regime began to crack down on MEK members, not just MEK members, but the Iranian civilians who opposed the regime and wanted freedom, people saw that there was no choice but to take up arms and to protect themselves. And during this time, the regime dramatically increased its amount of repression upon the people, and a lot of people were forced to flee. And so when the MEK fled from the country, they needed a geopolitical situation where they could still have good communication with the people inside Iran and to be able to have influence on the country and regime change, essentially. So the MEK went to Iraq, which is the closest that they could get to in Iraq, where they would have the freedom to do what they wanted to do.
The Iran-Iraq War?
Iran-Iraq War was earlier, yes.
Was in the early 80s,
yes, early
starting, I might be wrong by year, 1980, 1981, and ended in, I think, 1988. And that was during the time of the war. Rajavi himself was in France, but the war between Iran and Iraq was going on. There was a lot of fighting, like there was the famous War of the Cities. And my understanding is that many Iranians actually hold some sort of a grudge against the MEK because they say the organization had a very good relationship to Saddam Hussein, who was the enemy of Iran and who was involved in it. And so they accused the MEK of treason. Is that correct according to, I mean, is that perception of the Iranian public opinion correct as far as you can tell?
From what I can tell, there are some Iranians in the United States and the Western world who believe that. But we need to consider the context. The MEK went into Iraq in 1986. It established a presence in Iraq in 1986, and during that time, its main focus was we need to create an organization that has the power to lead the people through change inside Iran. So essentially, there was a need to have a good relationship with Saddam Hussein. Now, where the grudge starts to develop is with the accusations that the MEK helped Saddam Hussein attack Iranian people. And that was never the case. And there's evidence that the MEK had actually went to the border to stop Iraqi troops from attacking Iran. And they had helped author peace treaties between Iran and Iraq. So their purpose was not to side with Saddam and kill Iranian people, but to establish a presence close to the Iranian border in order to bring about regime change in Iran.
It's a little hard to imagine that somebody like Saddam Hussein would allow the MEK into Iraq if he doesn't get anything out of it.
Right, of course. And from what I understand, I don't know what details of what occurred. I don't know what happened internally. But from what I understand, the benefit to Saddam Hussein with having the MEK in Iraq and helping them establish a place along the border in Iran was so that the MEK could go in and bring about regime change by leading the Iranian people. And this regime change would essentially create an Iran that Iraq could have a good relationship with.
Okay, I would like you to give us a little bit of history about the relationship between Iraq, the United States, and Iran and Camp Ashraf starting in the 2000s.
Okay. Well, the United States went into Iraq in early 2000. And
2003.
In 2003, yes, that's correct. They essentially took over the entire country, and they removed Saddam Hussein from power. So there was a vacuum of power. And during this time, the MEK had a number of facilities along the Iran-Iraq border, and it chose to cooperate with the United States. This is not our war. Our purpose, again, is regime change in Iran. And this is your war. We will cooperate however we can. And so essentially the United States and the MEK had come up with a deal. The MEK would disarm, would give up its arms and consolidate into Camp Ashraf in exchange for the United States' protection against attacks from Iran. Obviously, the Iraqi situation of the Iraqi country was very vulnerable, and it was very easy for the Iranian government to now attack Camp Ashraf and the MEK facilities. In order for the MEK to cooperate, they gave up their arms to the United States to show that they're peaceful and they do not mean any harm and they wish to cooperate with the war in exchange for protection. Now, the United States, a year later, by this time they had established military and multinational forces around Camp Ashraf to ensure the protection of the people inside Camp Ashraf. But in 2004, they actually granted the MEK protected person status under the 4th Geneva Convention. So under international law, under humanitarian law, the MEK members inside Camp Ashraf were all protected. They even had little ID cards that they signed, they had their pictures on, they had ID numbers, and this proved that they were protected persons. What happened in 2009, a few years later, the United States began to pull its troops out of Iraq. And this left Camp Ashraf vulnerable to more attack. And this was around the time where al-Maliki had become president already, had become prime minister.
Of Iraq?
Of Iraq, yes. And was in power and would now oversee Camp Ashraf. So the United States made a deal with al-Maliki, saying, okay, we're pulling out of here. This is now going to be your sovereign nation. But these people, we need to sign a contract that guarantees their protection. So we will hand over the protection of the MEK to you so long as you guarantee that protection.
So there was an actual paper agreement signed?
Yeah, from what I understand, yes. I haven't physically seen it, but yes, from what I understand.
Okay.
Now, regardless of whether there was a contract, physical contract or not, these people are still considered international, the protected
Yes.
persons. But from what I understand, yes, there was a written contract between the United States and Iraq, that Iraq would take responsibility of the MEK members in Camp Ashraf so long as it guarantees the protection of the MEK members, protection against attack, protection against the Iranian government, essentially. And during this time, al-Maliki took his opportunity to attack Camp Ashraf, and his government, his military, had injured hundreds of people, had killed dozens of people, and taken 36, I believe, hostage. And these people had gone on hunger strikes. They were not provided any food, so they essentially had not eaten for, I think, over a month.
So you make an interesting point here. You say he took them hostage. What's the difference between hostage and prisoners? Or, you know, you put somebody in jail. You jail somebody.
Right. Well, yes, I guess when you're taken hostage, in this particular situation, they were in jail. They were in a prison cell. Each of them were in prison cells.
But
what makes them a hostage is what the Iraqi government had said. Essentially, the Iraqi government had made a deal with the Iranian government to get these people into Iran.
Into Iran.
Into Iran, okay. Yes. Okay, so I'll take
Hand
a
them
back
over
step.
to the Iranian government.
Yes.
Okay.
The Iranian government sees the MEK as a threat, so they want to expel these people. They want to expel the MEK, the members of the MEK. Okay. So in the interest of the Iranian regime, the Iraqi government began to persecute these people, to weaken them, and then force them back into Iran. Take them hostage, essentially, to make them, force them to make a move to go back into Iran. So essentially, with a hostage taken, the difference between imprisonment and a hostage taken imprisonment is you put somebody in jail potentially because they've done something wrong, as a form of punishment, is generally what we understand of imprisonment. Now, there's a fine line between imprisonment and hostage taking, but in the sense of hostage taking, the government was actually wants something in return for the people. And in this sense, the Iraqi government wanted to ensure that the people of Camp Ashraf were going to be expelled back to Iran.
With the Iraq War, essentially Iran became more powerful in the region, because now you had in Iraq a Shiite government ruled by a Shiite majority. You no longer had Saddam Hussein and the Sunni minority, and of course they started creating close relationships with Iranians, with the Iranian government, and most observers really say that Iran, after the war, started playing a stronger role in Iraq. So
yeah, well, I've heard opinions that Iran planted Maliki into Iran. Now, that's a very extreme way of putting it.
That's maybe a little bit of a conspiracy
yes,
theory.
exactly. It's a very extreme way of putting it. But from what I understand, Maliki was educated in Iran. And because of this close relationship, many of his actions, at least against the MEK in Camp Ashraf, were on the behest of Iranian regime's suggestions and requests. Iran had provided a lot of, there was a lot of transfer of IEDs, and
IEDs?
IEDs are explosive devices. I don't remember what the I stands for, but they were devices that were used by insurgents in Iraq against U.S. military forces, Western military forces. Because of these transfers, there was also a lot of communication transfer between Iran and Iraq, and the MEK had intercepted this through its resources inside Iran. The MEK had provided the intel on the fact that Iran was sending out weapons to destroy U.S. military
So
vehicles.
during the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the MEK provided the United States with intelligence, helping it gain control over Iraq.
Yes. Well, not helping it gain control over Iraq, but helping it protect itself, essentially. Because what they were...
Helping it protect itself as it gained control over Iraq.
We can put it however we want to put it. however we wanted to put it. But essentially, the MEK did not want to see American troops killed.
What is Camp Ashraf like? I looked at a video on your website, and that was really very interesting. I couldn't quite tell, is this a military camp? Is this a place where people live? Is it a small city? What was Camp Ashraf? Because now it's really empty, basically. So what is it?
Well, what was it, I would say? What is it now? It's destroyed. The Iraqi military had attacked it and basically destroyed most of the city. And the people had to move were relocated from Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty. But while they were there, after they had consolidated in 2003, while they were in Camp Ashraf, the MEK members had really built a very self-sustaining city. They had infrastructure, they had roads, they had cars, they had gas stations, they had universities, Olympic-sized pools.
So you said it had universities, it had schools, it had roads. Well, you said that between 3,000 and 5,000 may have lived there, correct?
Yes.
How would that sustain a university? 3,000 people, can you have a university in that small a town?
Well, there's two things. Well, yes, it's not really a small town per se. 3,000 to 5,000 people can live in a small town. But this was actually bigger than a small town. I would say it was over 50 kilometers, square kilometers large. That is my estimate of it. I have to get the specifics on that later. Now, the two things is, one, many of the MEK members are university educated. In fact, some of them were educated in the Western worlds. There's people who had graduated from UCLA, University of Michigan, Houston, and they chose to go back to Camp Ashraf, to go back into Iraq because they believed in the cause. And during this time, they could provide support, education support, something that they had learned back in Western worlds.
And it seemed that not only were they university educated, they had PhDs.
Yes.
So you could actually use them to teach classes and create a new cohort of knowledgeable people?
Oh yeah, there were engineers, there were mathematicians, a whole plethora of different majors and studies, forms of studies among the people of the of Camp Ashraf. And so PhDs and master's degree holders, they were all over campus. And honestly, the MEK, that's what it was based off of. The first founder of the MEK was a university student.
So there is not, I would say there's probably not a full-size university, but there is, as you say, college-level training delivered by people that have PhDs.
Yes.
You also said that there are schools. Does that mean that there are children who lived in Camp Ashraf?
No. Children, if you're talking about people who are not adults, under 17, 18 years old, no. Not to my understanding, at least definitely not within the past 15 years. Now, I obviously was in Camp Ashraf back in the late 80s, but I had to come out because of the conflict in the region. And it was very dangerous. I remember...
so you were actually there?
Oh, yes, I was in Camp Ashraf. I was in the Iraqi area. And me, not just me, but many other kids around my age, so around between the ages of 2 to 10, 11 years old. And many of these kids had to be sent out to Western worlds. And what the MEK, because the MEK had a very large extension out into Western worlds, it had a very large membership and support base outside, so many people were willing to take in these kids. And so you have to think from the perspective of an MEK member, how selfless it is on the part of my mom and my dad to let me go, their only child. Let me go to a country where I have opportunities, where I have the freedom to think, to learn, to act, to say what I want, the opportunity to speak about them to you and many other people. And when you think of it in that context and you say that the actions that they've committed, they've given themselves up. They've given their only. I mean, I understand from mothers. I can never be a mother, but when mothers speak to me and they hear my story, they say that my mother is a wonderful woman. is a very remarkable woman because it is so difficult, almost impossible for a woman to give up her only child.
How could Camp Ashraf function economically? What were its economic foundations?
Now, if you're asking how they made money, I suppose.
How did they sustain themselves, right?
Well, Camp Ashraf, again, it had infrastructure, it had facilities, it had workshops. They would actually do work, from what I understand, for Iraqis. There were political work, there were service jobs. I mean, obviously, many of them were engineers, so they would build certain facilities and buildings and such for Iraqis. In fact, many Iraqis it was an open community. Iraqis would visit.
That was during the time of Saddam Hussein, right? In the 1980s,
This was in 2000 when the MEK consolidated into Camp Ashraf. They started to develop this city. They started to build parks, museums, university, infrastructure, the roads, and all of that stuff, right? And in order to upkeep this, it was also an open community for Iraqis to come and go. So women, children, they all came and went during the time where the United States had a presence there, and even before it, essentially. Now, the way they would economically sustain was by providing services to Iraqis. Now, there's a case, it's pretty popular with the MEK supporters and members, where the MEK had held a mediation summit, I guess you can call it, between Shiite and Sunni Muslims to mediate the conflict between them, to resolve conflict between them. And as a result of that, 2.5 million Iraqis signed a letter saying in support of the MEK in Camp Ashraf. I mean, it was an oasis in the middle of the desert, sort of like Thunderbird.
I looked at some satellite images, and you know, in Google, what's it called? Google Earth.
Yes.
You don't see that much, but what I saw was pretty flat, pretty barren. So you're calling it an oasis?
Right. Well,
Explain how is it an oasis?
Okay, I'll show you pictures. I can show you pictures, but they've planted trees in areas where they wouldn't grow. I mean, this is in the barren desert that they had to consolidate into when the U.S. came in. And they transformed it to have grass. They have soccer fields, huge Olympic-size, World Cup-size soccer fields. They have parks with water fountains.
Does it have agriculture?
No, they don't. Well, I mean, to sustain themselves, I'm not sure. I can assume that they did, because a lot of Iranians, particularly my mother, likes to plant vegetables. So I can assume that they did, but I can't answer that 100%.
Where are the MEKers now? Now that I think Camp Ashraf was dismantled at about the same time when the organization got off the American terrorist watch list.
Yes, in fact, that was actually part of the agreement. The United States said that the MEK, if you relocate from Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty, and the reason behind this was because the Iraqi government wanted them out of Camp Ashraf. And the reason behind that was because the Iranian government had asked the Iraqi government to do it. But back to the future. So as far as the agreement goes, the MEK members had to meet a certain requirement of relocating from Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty, and this was what would encourage the State Department to remove them from the foreign terrorist organizations list. I think there's only a few hundred MEK members still left in Camp Ashraf, but the majority of them are in Camp Liberty. And Camp Liberty was the last military camp that the United States had in Iraq.
And is that now also under the control of the Iraqi government?
Yes, because the Iraqi government now has its military forces around Camp Liberty as well.
You're seriously worried about your parents?
Well, of course, of course. And talking about them gets me emotional, so I don't know if you want me to do that here.
No tears, no tears on this podcast, please.
Okay.
let's move on to the last set of questions that I would like to ask you for today, and that is about the feat of getting off the list of foreign terrorist organizations. That is quite difficult. There are a few organizations that have been were taken off that list before the MEK, but it's not an easy feat, and I think the MEK went to great lengths to actually accomplish that. What strategy has been used to do that, other than just giving up arms and
Right. I mean, the MEK has proved to the Western world and to the United States that it's willing to cooperate. It's a peaceful organization. Hence why it has so many supporters from the United States who speak on behalf of it. They say that this is a peaceful organization. We should support it. It seeks democratic change in Iran. This matches the values of the United States. Why are we not supporting the MEK? So on one front, you have a political push. You have political figures who are encouraging the State Department, or who were encouraging the State Department to remove it. On another front, you have the legal battle, where in court, the Court of Justice, the Court of Appeals in D.C., had said that there was no legal or factual basis for the MEK to be on the foreign terrorist organizations list in the first place, and they should not be right now. And if the State Department doesn't take action to remove them, they were very clear that they would take assertive action if it were to come back to the courts. But the court sent it to the State Department because it was initially the State Department that had put the MEK on the foreign terrorist organizations list.
Now, how come somebody like Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, goes into battle for this organization? What's the connection here? He's a New Yorker here, Iranian.
Well, you know, Rudy Giuliani it's a very interesting situation with him because he witnessed firsthand in his own city a terrorist attack. The Twin Towers were hit down when he was mayor of New York. So he has experience with counterterrorism and has a good knowledge of terrorism. So when he came and spoke on behalf of the MEK, he spoke from his own will, understanding that the MEK truly was not a terrorist organization, but a peaceful one.
But how did he get to that point? Was he paid?
No.
I mean,
I'm not sure about the whole pay thing. And if he was, then that's a fee that he should have taken. That it's a, you know, if I speak, if I'm a very famous person or if I'm a political figure and I get paid to speak, then that's a fee that I charge. But that's not the topic at all. That really defeats the purpose. Whether
so you're saying, okay, these famous people, well-known people, they may have charged speaker's fee and they may have received them, but it cannot be considered as sort of a bribe.
It's a fee.
They were actually convinced that the organization was not dangerous.
If a dignitary takes fees for speaking, it's because he takes fees for speaking. That's essentially the business that he's in after getting out of politics or getting out of whatever work he's done before. They consult and they get paid for speaking. And it also doesn't take the legitimacy away from their beliefs. Most of these people, if not all of them, the people who've supported the MEK are not going to come support an organization that they truly don't believe in.
These were very eloquent words from a gentleman here whose parents are in the MEK, so it doesn't happen very often that you meet somebody like that. Now, the United States decided that the MEK is not a terrorist organization. But the next question is it a cult? And that's quite a different question. And that we're going to address next time we meet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.